A fearless Yoruba woman has sent a direct message to the Nigerian government led by Bola Ahmed Tinubu to apologize to the Igbos and ask for forgiveness for all the atrocities committed against them. She stated that President Tinubu and the Nigerian government must apologize to the Igbos. Many Nigerians believe the government should officially apologize to the Igbo people for the suffering they endured, particularly during the Biafran War. They highlight how the Igbo people have faced marginalization, subjugation, and exclusion from Nigeria's political system since the war. The 2023 elections further exposed that Nigeria is not ready to fully integrate the Igbo people, as even their best candidates were rejected. They claim that there is an ingrained animosity towards the Igbo people, preventing fair treatment and inclusion in the country's leadership. Some critics argue that an apology is not enough. The Igbo should be given the choice to remain in Nigeria or leave and form their own nation. They suggest Nigeria should create a memorial similar to Rwanda's Genocide Museum to acknowledge the Igbo suffering during the war. Former Nigerian military leader Ibrahim Babangida, IBB, made revelations about past political injustices, prompting more Nigerians to recognize the mistreatment of the Igbo people. Despite decades passing, the Igbo continue to experience segregation and lack of representation in governance and national affairs. They call for genuine reconciliation, where all ethnic groups in Nigeria, including minorities, are given equal opportunities. Meanwhile, some critics are skeptic whether an apology would change anything or if the Igbo will continue their push for an independent Biafra. I was sitting at home one quiet afternoon when I came across a news report that stopped me in my tracks. I had always known that Nigeria had a complicated history, but the story I heard that day struck a deep chord within me. A fearless Yoruba woman had spoken out in a tone so raw and honest that it felt as if she were telling her own personal tale. A tale that demanded that the Nigerian government, led by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, must apologize to the Igbo people for all the atrocities committed against them. I felt compelled to share this story with you in my own words, as if I was sitting down with a friend and explaining everything that had unfolded in a language that is simple and sincere. I remember thinking about how rare it is for someone to speak so boldly about a painful chapter in our history. The woman, with remarkable courage and conviction, insisted that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu and the entire Nigerian government should offer a formal apology to the Igbo people. Her message was not just a call for empty words. It was a heartfelt demand for recognition, acknowledgement, and, ultimately, healing for the suffering that the Igbo people endured, especially during the terrible years of the Biafran War. In her impassioned words, she reminded everyone that the wounds inflicted upon the Igbo community are not wounds of the distant past, but scars that continue to affect lives even today. As I listened to her message, I couldn't help but think about the many accounts I had heard growing up. My parents, my grandparents, and even older relatives had recounted stories of the Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, and the immense suffering that came with it. They described how the Igbo people, who once held a significant part of our national identity, had been sidelined and marginalized long after the conflict ended. It was not just a matter of political exclusion, it was an issue of deep-seated injustice and historical neglect. For years, many Nigerians have believed that the government needed to take concrete steps to apologize and acknowledge the terrible injustices faced by the Igbo community. I thought about how the recent 2023 elections had further underscored this painful reality. In those elections, it became glaringly obvious that even the best candidates emerging from the Igbo community were not being given a fair chance to lead or be represented in our government. The outcome of those elections was a stark reminder that the Nigerian political system still had a long way to go when it came to integrating every ethnic group fully and equally. It seemed that there was an underlying current of prejudice, a kind of historical bias that continued to prevent fair treatment and inclusion. The idea that an apology could somehow mend these deep divisions felt both hopeful and challenging, and it raised a crucial question in my mind. Can words ever truly heal wounds that run so deep? The woman's message was not delivered in a formal, detached manner. Instead, it was filled with the kind of passionate emotion that comes from years of suppressed grief and anger. She spoke in a way that made it clear she was not just reciting historical facts, but was telling a story that was part of her very identity. The Igbo people have been on the receiving end of marginalization, subjugation, and exclusion for decades. Many of them, I learned, have felt that the sacrifices made during the Biafran War were never properly recognized or compensated by subsequent governments. Instead, their contributions and sufferings were brushed aside, leaving behind a legacy of bitterness and disillusionment. I recalled the vivid descriptions that had been shared during the report. The narrative painted a picture of a time when families were torn apart, communities were decimated, and entire generations were left scarred by the horrors of conflict. The words of the speaker brought to mind images of mothers and fathers recounting how their children had suffered, of families struggling to survive in the midst of chaos and hunger. There were descriptions of desperate times when, in the face of starvation and despair, people resorted to unthinkable measures just to keep their loved ones alive. I felt a deep sadness as I imagined the daily struggle and the constant fear that must have gripped those who lived through such dark times. At the same time, I could sense a spark of determination in her voice, a determination to ensure that history does not repeat itself. The call for an apology was not simply about admitting guilt. It was about setting the stage for a new era of reconciliation. The speaker argued that if the Nigerian government were to come forward and acknowledge its past mistakes, it might pave the way for genuine healing among all Nigerians. An official apology could serve as a symbolic gesture, a public admission that the pain inflicted upon the Igbo people was real, and that it is high time for that pain to be addressed with sincerity and compassion. Yet as I pondered these ideas, I realized that an apology alone might not be enough. The conversation around this issue has always been fraught with complexity. There are voices in our society who argue that merely saying sorry does nothing to change the systemic inequities that have long plagued our nation. They contend that the Igbo people should be given more than just words. They should be granted the freedom to choose their own destiny. For some, the idea of remaining within a country that has repeatedly failed to treat them with fairness is no longer acceptable. These critics propose that the Igbo community should be given the opportunity either to fully integrate with the rest of the nation on equal terms, or to have the freedom to form their own independent nation, a separate entity where they can govern themselves and preserve their culture without the shadow of historical injustice. I found this argument to be both understandable and heartbreaking. It is difficult to fathom how a people who have endured so much hardship could continue to hope for full inclusion in a system that has not shown much willingness to change. I thought about the possibility of creating a memorial, a place of remembrance much like the Genocide Museum in Rwanda. Such a memorial would not only serve as a constant reminder of the tragedies of the past, but also as a tribute to the resilience and strength of the Igbo people. It would be a place where future generations could learn about the sacrifices made and the lessons that history has taught us about the perils of division and hatred. As I continued to reflect, my mind wandered to the revelations made by former Nigerian military leader Ibrahim Babangida. His accounts of past political injustices had stirred up long-buried memories and had led many Nigerians to acknowledge the mistreatment of the Igbo people. Even though decades have passed since the Nigerian Civil War, the echoes of that conflict are still very much present in the everyday lives of the Igbo community. The stories of segregation, exclusion from political power, and the constant struggle for recognition resonate deeply with those who have lived through these experiences. It made me realize that the pain of the past is not easily erased, and that healing requires a level of openness and honesty that many are still reluctant to embrace. The report I listened to did more than just recount historical events. It invited listeners to engage with these issues on a deeply personal level. I found myself thinking about the many conversations I have had with friends and family members, conversations that often veered into the territory of national identity and historical accountability. There is a shared understanding among many Nigerians that the country's progress is hindered by unresolved grievances. The sense of injustice is not confined to one community alone. It affects the entire fabric of our society. When one group is marginalized, it weakens the whole nation. This idea resonated strongly with me as I considered the future of our country. Listening to the passionate plea for an apology, I began to question whether the current state of Nigerian politics was truly capable of addressing these deep-rooted issues. The 2023 elections, for instance, had laid bare the persistent biases that seemed to be woven into the political system. Despite the efforts of many Igbo candidates who possessed the talent, integrity, and vision needed to lead, their voices were systematically drowned out. It was as if there were unwritten rules that dictated who could and could not participate in the highest levels of government. Such a reality is not only disheartening, but also a stark indicator of the challenges that lie ahead if genuine reconciliation is to be achieved. I found myself reflecting on the broader implications of this struggle for inclusion. The narrative suggested that until the Nigerian government takes real steps to address the historical wrongs, the divisions within our society will only grow deeper. The call for an apology was not just about mending a broken relationship between the government and the Igbo people. It was about forging a path toward a more united and equitable nation. The idea was simple, yet profound. If we can come to terms with our past, we might finally be able to create a future where every citizen is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. The speaker's tone was conversational, yet every word carried the weight of a painful history that could not be ignored. I remember her saying that the truth had finally come to light, and that for too long, the Nigerian government had refused to acknowledge the depth of its wrongs. She spoke of the bitterness that still lingered among the Igbo people, a bitterness that was born out of years of neglect and abuse. This bitterness, she argued, was not something that could be easily swept under the rug. It was a living, breathing reminder of a dark chapter in our nation's history, a chapter that demanded accountability and recognition. I also recalled her vivid descriptions of the war. She spoke of a time when Nigerian society was sharply divided, when the struggle for power and survival led to unimaginable cruelty. Families were ripped apart and communities were left in ruins. Even as other Nigerians went about their daily lives, attending universities, going to work, and living seemingly normal lives, the Igbo community was left to grapple with the aftermath of a conflict that had taken so much from them. The image of children suffering, of parents mourning the loss of their loved ones, and of an entire community living under the shadow of historical injustice was a powerful one. It was a reminder that history is not just a collection of events that happened long ago. It is a living force that continues to shape our present and our future. In that moment, I realized that the struggle for an apology was not merely a political issue. It was a human issue. It was about recognizing the pain of those who had been wronged and taking concrete steps to ensure that such pain would not be repeated. The conversation around this issue is one that cuts across all levels of our society. It is a conversation that challenges us to confront the uncomfortable truths about our past and to work together to build a more inclusive future. I felt that the Yoruba woman's words were a call to action, a call for all of us to stand up, to speak out, and to demand that the injustices of the past be acknowledged and rectified.
Nigeria should apologize to the Igbos. There is need for us to acknowledge, first and foremost, that they suffered something. There is need for Nigeria to honor the memory of the dead. We say they are bitter. We say, yeah, they are always shouting Biafra. You say they all don't cooperate. Everyone whose parents has sat down and told the story of what happened during Biafra war, there's no way they will not have that bitterness. Only a few will still be able to stay neutral. Okay, in case you do not understand or you don't remember, you've not read the history. During that time, that Biafrans suffered so much loss. Nigerians were busy doing their lives. It was as if nothing was amiss. While their children were dying, while they had shoko, because of food not coming in, they began to eat lizards. Some cook dead meat and eat. While all those terrible things were happening, Nigeria, Nigerians, those on the side of Nigeria, they were going to their universities, they were going to their schools. Everything was normal. Though it was a war, that was not, how do you say it? You cannot say that it was, we didn't feel it the same way. So, what are we supposed to do? Nigeria should apologize. It's like we need something more than what Buhari tried to do with Abiola's family. We need to do something and to have a day where when we mark the demise of so many of their people. Look, we are not saying we are marking Biafra. God forbid. I don't even subscribe to that. Just like in Rwanda, the case in Rwanda, something like this, worse than this happened in Rwanda. There was a genocide. Today, they have a memorial site that when you go into, it's a big museum in Rwanda. When you go there, you see the picture of as many as possible that they could find. Whoever was killed, who was killed during the war. Whether a child, a girl, a boy, man, woman, the picture will be there, the story will be there. It's not only Biafra, of course. Of course, there are issues that, are in other places like Kaduna, Jos, that usually causes their problem, that, a fight between the Muslims and the Christians. That also needs to be addressed. God will give us the wisdom.
32 years after the Nigerian Civil War, a Nigerian military officer who took part in the Civil War and eventually became the head of state of Nigeria eventually wrote a book at his old age to tell his side of the story. Now, that is not my immediate concern about the episode. My observation is this: most African leaders forget that they will eventually grow old and pass on eventually. Now, for 32 years, a tribe in Nigeria called the Igbo people have been subjugated under immense segregation, immense marginalization, and immense hatred. For what? All over a lie that the 1966 coup was an Igbo coup. Millions of lives were lost because of a lie. And a whole race was subjugated to suffer 30 years of all forms of atrocious, inhumane treatment to a particular people. Now, one officer decided, because he is aware that very soon the gate or the doors of a tomb will soon call him, and therefore, maybe buoyed by emotions, maybe buoyed by guilt, decided to tell his side of the story. Now, first and foremost, I like to appreciate the fact that at least he is human enough to tell his side of the story, the truth, before he passes on. I want to appreciate General Badamasi Babangida for the book. It's a huge eye-opener and offers a whole new perspective to the Nigerian issues or to the Nigerian discourse. Okay, one thing that I must immediately say before I jump to the conclusion is that in that book launch, it's more or less like launching a book and inviting all the thieves in Nigeria to come and be part of that book. It was more or less like a gathering of all the hypocrites that have called themselves politicians in Nigeria. And what is even more worrisome is that the donations, 5 billion naira, 5 million naira, 400 million naira, 30 million, 40 million, 50 million, pretending that they are not part of the problem. But that's something Nigerians are all already used to. The main thing about this video is the Igbo question. Now that we have known that the Igbos have been wronged and have been subjected to live under a lie for 32 years, what should be the most appropriate Nigerian response to this revelation? Now, I know that I have not for some time had a good standing with some of, let me put it, the Igbo agitators for Biafra. Not that I don't see a reason for the agitation, but I will not condone an agenda hidden under a supposedly justified agenda. That being said, Nigeria has indeed offended the Igbo race. And what's even more, the last election that was held in 2023 didn't even prove that Nigeria is ready to assimilate the Igbos into the Nigerian polity. It's almost as if somewhere in an unwritten statement there is a conclusion that the Igbos must remain subjugated and not be involved in the scheme of things in the Nigerian polity. The 2023 election opened a whole truth that even the best of the Igbo race is not acceptable to be the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Then I say again, now that the truth is open, what then is the state of the Nigerian mind? Are we now ready to assimilate everybody, not just the Igbos alone, but every other tribe that has been assumed to be minorities in Nigeria? You see, I am not somebody who is attuned to saying things that pleases the ears of maybe my detractors. I like to align with the facts and basics. The Igbo tribe is one of many tribes in Nigeria. And if we form a country and we call it the Federal Republic of Nigeria, I believe every tribe should have equal access to the availabilities of the spoils of what we refer to as the national cake. Well, I am not really in the mood to say much, but I really do hope that after this truth, for those who have had access to the book of General Badamasi Babangida, will begin to have a change of heart and begin to start a process of truly healing what the Civil War cost in 1966, where the then head of state, Gowon, said, "No victor, no vanquished." If truly Nigeria must be one, now is the time that those we perceived to have conquered should be victors. Those we perceived to have been humiliated should be indeed recompensed and brought into the scheme of things, so that Nigeria can indeed be one. If indeed there is no victor, no vanquished, this is the time to show the Igbos that Nigeria loves them and it's time to integrate them. My name is Magnus Soraka. Please follow this page and share this post now.
This is the end of our news update. Please click the icon on the top right corner of your screen to watch my next video. You will enjoy it. I will see you again in my next update. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now.